Welcome to the Brain's Body. Dr. Slaton Lyme. The ultimate experience is you. Now, we're talking about human system science and the best interest of the child, mental health, and self-awareness. And I talk about this because we're talking about the breath of life experience. And when I talk about the crisis of self, we're talking about sense and receive path damage. And so we want to make it clear that in order to work with a child whose breath of life experience has been damaged by poor contact interaction, you want to understand the sense of feel for self. Because the sense of feel for self is what the child's born with. So when they come out of the womb, they are prepared and wired for contact. That's the physics. And then the neural activity between their brain and the interaction that occurs with the doctor and anyone else inside that situation at the breath of life. And so now you're talking about brain development, and you're talking about neurologic networks taking shape and moving forward from where that child is. But you are older, and your neural networks may not realize the magnitude of handling the child without focused signs of care on understand they are new technology, and they have to be brought into social contact through signs of care because their sense of feel for you is what they're working through to stay calm, cool, and collected because they're born as information processors. And I'm talking about how they process your contact, your interaction. And I'm saying to you that many children get crossed up at the breath of life because they're not handled properly. So when I talk to you about human system science, I'm talking about self first, brain, body, and sense events. Understand yours. Because when you understand what your brain, body, and sense networks are doing, when you have contact with a child, now that child brain is what you're dealing with. You're talking to the brain, not the body. You interact with the brain, not the body. You're learning the brain, not the body. So the body exists, but it's not the focus of your interaction. The focus of your interaction is on the brain. You can't see the brain. And that's the crisis of self because you're interacting through contact neurologically. You can't see yourself processing or dealing with anger, fear, and anxiety that the child's picking up because they can feel you, right? And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about how do you set a child up for success, contact in the home, interaction in school, cooperation in the neighborhood, participation in the workforce. See, many children don't reach that level of functionality because they're broken down along the way because if you go into a home situation and there's poor contact, that's poor neural networking being developed or evolved in the higher levels of interaction because every day that child is prepared for higher stages of interaction with other people, other environments, in order for them to successfully move through home, school, neighbor, workplace networks. That's what we're talking about today. So I'm talking about mental health. And mental health because mental health means the world to a child doesn't understand the concept of what it means to be healthy mentally. And that's what we're talking about. You care for the brain, you talk to the brain, you're teaching the child to realize what's going on inside of him or her. And that's very critical to your sense of feel for self. So you're teaching the child how to understand how they feel things and why they go through emotions. Because when you feel something, you're processing that experience. And as you process that experience, emotion is involved. Why? Because you're a real person and we're born emotional. Remember the breath of life, go back to it, spanked on the butt. What did you do? You cried. That's called emotion, right? And so you're constantly moving through stages of emotion in contact interaction. Now the thought part of our discussion evolves through the interaction because the memory kicks in through processing. So when you process, thought is forward feed, and thought comes forward, emotions going backward, and that's that clash that you talk about, that I talk about in the Christ itself. Sense, receive path functioning. The sense path handles contact, the receive path processes interaction. Your sense of feel for self is the process variable. You sense to feel the other person's energy, action, and feelings, or the environment, energy, action, and feelings of the environment. So what am I saying to you? I'm saying to you that the Christ itself with children evolves because you are an environmental influence. And when you have contact with them, they got to process that contact. And it must be through signs of care to help them understand how to move through those feelings, that emotion, and that forward feed thought about the experience, because the brain is storing it. Now you're reflecting, but if you break it down, how does a child learn the consequences of the experience if they don't know how to process information flow? How do they reach that level of functionality where you're talking to him or her about the consequences of not doing this way or that way? And you're talking program, because chores are all, clean up your room, wash your dishes, every you do it continuously. That's program. You want the child to process the program. So you have to allow the child to learn how to evolve neurophysically. And I'm talking about neurophysics itself when I say that. And so I'm saying to you, these are things that you can't see. You can't see the brain because the body wears the brain. You can see the state of mind because the body wears a state of mind. You're dealing with the state of mind, the body, because you're trying to shape the mind of the child. I'm talking about the neurophysics of the child you can't see. And you have to understand that you study the brain to learn how the child feels for you, self, and others, because that's processing. So when I have a kid who's having difficulty inside the home, these are the things you look for. You look for how they make contact. You look at the way they appear when they're interacting, because that's brain work in front of you taking place. And you're not observing the body as a behavior, you're observing the body to record the responses that you're viewing and to detect if there's actual thought or emotion, which is involved in the transaction. We're talking about human system science. We're talking about how do you study a human being, not an animal, because children are technologies. And no child is like another child. I mean, we are all similar, but there are things about each of us that make us unique. And that's why I'm talking about the best interest of the child in the breath of life experience. And I'm talking about how do you understand mental health when it's such a broad subject, but it begins the breath of life is what I'm saying. And so in brain talk, I'm getting back to that, because the way you talk to a child is critical from the breath of life forward. I'm saying that the infant comes out talking baby talk, and you're supposed to come forward talking brain talk. That means reading and interpreting the child's noises and sounds and allowing yourself to feel for that child's energy. Now you're allowing that child to interact through you through a sense of feel. And that sense of feel is being shared with the child. So now the signs of care is on the front, not the back, because you're aware this is baby talk. This is real talk. It's just baby talk. I have to talk clear, crisp English or whatever language you're speaking in a caring, calm, cool, collected state so that my child can interact with me more effectively through the crises I am in as a human being who's moving through man-made systems, who has up and down days, moments, so forth and so on, because we're talking about how do you set a kid up for success in man-made environments, home, school, native workplace network, where they have to learn how to live in a home, learn in school, think in neighborhood, and respond in the workplace so they can take care of themselves, so they can take care of their children. They can move around the world because these systems are everywhere, in every society, every culture, your home, your school, your neighborhood, your workplace. But we're talking about in the 21st century where everything is now wireless, okay? So you have to be able to understand why we're talking about the child's brain and not the child's body. Because the brain is a neural network that is attuned to the 21st century technologies, IT, all those types of things. And so we're talking about how do we stop hurting children, chances for real success, instead of looking at them and saying, oh, he or she didn't do it right, didn't do that right. No, you didn't do it right. No, we didn't do it right, because we have an obligation to understand forward feed, what we do and what we didn't do, and then realize what we must do to recover this child's sense of feel for self and restore the processing techniques to levels that they would be had that not happened, if he or she did not have that situation involved with you not knowing how to deliver signs of care, so that child can feel the way through you and learn how to feel their way through other people in difficult contexts, because your brain is on and you're not being soft. You're trying to teach to the brain, work with the brain, and allow the brain to evolve. I say to the age of 3, this system needs to be put in place so that your child's brain is in the lead of the body, so that when you have a child that turns 6, 7, and 8, they know how to communicate with you. The sense, feel, the focus, the receive, the process, the respond, or language system. And you're having real dialogue. Look here, honey, you gotta remember, you have to process this information. No, don't run from it. I know it's uncomfortable, but look here, when you process it, your sense of feel for self takes the lead. Now your brain is, and you understand your brain because we talk about it all the time, okay? And we can look at your responses. Now we talk about consequential learning. We can look at your response and see that you care. And it's okay to care. And it's also okay to be tough. But you have to choose the right situations to move through that crisis. So the crisis itself is a sense and receive path dysfunction when the information flow is disrupted by environmental or neurologic problems, organic or environmental. And what are we saying? How do you move through that? This is a human system science. We're not talking about animals. We're talking about human beings and how human beings have to learn how to live, learn how to learn how to think, learn how to respond. We're talking about self-awareness in multiple levels. Self-awareness of who you are in the home, self-awareness of who you are in a classroom, self-awareness of who you are in a neighborhood, self-awareness of who you are in a workplace. Because your whole system, at the end of the day, you must learn how to function and want to be in the workplace. But if you miss one of those pathways, it can affect the way you learn how to lead a family, develop a business, invest in children. This is Dr. Slaton Live that you're listening to. Talking about the crisis itself. How does anger shape your understanding? Dive in. Let's talk about it, because that's what we're talking about. Human system science, the crisis itself. You know, we have children and we easily and readily show them anger. I mean, you know, somebody calls you on the phone, you're walking around the kitchen cursing, and the child is digesting that information. It's breaking down the neural functions because that's disturbing to their human system. And they got to work through it. And if they don't have a sense of feel, then how do they do that? Because sense of feel means you got to process that. So you get off the phone, the child says, now, what's wrong, Mom? What's wrong, Dad? Why is this happening? You know, and you got to have a conversation. You don't just, and tell them to go away. No. You are talking to the child's brain. The child's brain is wondering, why are you acting like that? Why are you behaving like that? And that's a real dialogue. Why? Because you're trying to teach them or understand how to assess their sense and receive path functions so they can function beyond you. in that next context inside the school. When a teacher asks them a question and it's confusing, they can't be afraid to think it through, feelings of self, and ask the teacher why. No, that's very insightful because the brain is in the lead, and you want the brain to teach the child how to move through the crisis of self, because the crisis of self is being shared. We are all moving through our own moments. And that's what I'm saying to you. And that's one of the reasons why we're talking about the best interest of the child, because we are not cognizant of how we take away sense functions, because we're physical and the brain is neurological, but the body is physical. So you do things physically that break down information flow. So the child would have processed that contact this way, but you displayed it that way. So they don't get to experience the proper way that a sense of feel evolves. They just work off your sense of you. Now, there's no processing in that. That is a memory. And so that memory has to be processed. So we're talking about why kids in crises can be so upset and hard to talk to, because they have been in a situation dealing with that pain, hurt, and sadness externally as a memory block, and not processing the experience where their brain is actually involved in the lead of the body, so that when they respond, it's controlled and focused, and that energy moves through them. Now reflection kicks in. The consequences are realized both ways, positively and negatively, because the brain is in the lead of the body. That's what we're talking about, the crisis self. So we're talking about a system that you look at in terms of brain-body, body-mind conflicts, because you're taught about the mind. Because some people really believe that the mind is the brain. So that's why I talk about body-mind, because the body is physical and the mind is the programmed state. It's okay, because what I'm talking about is that children have to learn how to process you in your programmed state, because that's what you're delivering, because you have been socialized to parent a certain way. And so you're trying to program this kid to receive your parenting style, right? That is a state of mind. And so they don't get to experience the process of thought in the experience of that memory. You're saying, do it this way, which means do it like you see me do it. So when you're in the kitchen acting out, there you go. So your kid's out of control in these other environments, and it all began with you not having a sense of feel for the child's brain. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about brain talk, and how you talk to a child's brain and not the body, so that your brain is always in the lead of the dialogue, right? And that way you're learning how to sense, to feel, to focus, how you interact with your child and your child interacts with you. And then you have to calm down, be cool, and continue to collect that sense of feel, because the questioning is real. It's reality-based, because you have to see the world as it is. Information flow is everywhere. You got to teach or allow the child to ask those questions and dialogue with you. It may be silly to you, but that's when you go back to baby talk. You never stop brain talking. Your baby talk, you work your way through it, because you're having a real conversation, but you want it to be easy for the child to digest without any in-between, speaking the truth, but breaking it down so that this kid can understand why you want to have this conversation, where you don't want to have a conversation, because at the end of the day, you want to process that experience of what happened, because you know it's uncomfortable. Now, how do you deliver that to the kid? So the kid can say, you're right, Mom, Dad, that don't feel good. I agree with that. No, because as you get into the later stages of interaction, the problems come from the social phenomenons of other people and their experiences coming into your world. So your kid gets lost because you haven't experienced their brain. They haven't experienced your brain. So when things happen, how do you read the behavior patterns? Huh? The brain I'm talking about, not the body. How do you read the behavior patterns of the brain? See? That's why we're talking about. That's why we're having this conversation. Okay? So human system science was pioneered so that we can have a conversation, had nothing to do with animal science. It's just about how do human beings learn, live, think, and respond through the crisis of self because we're human. We move through this. We have difficulties because we have human systems that are predicated upon moving through known and unknown situations continuously because those are growth cycles. And when you resist the experience of self and others, you are, what do they call it? Separating yourself, isolating yourself, subjugating yourself, and you're not the person that you should be because you're regressing instead of progressing through the experience of that negative or positive field of energy, action, and feeling. So what I've been talking to you, I'm a human system scientist. All I do is study human beings. And when I say study, learn human beings. I've been in classrooms with teachers, parents, administrators, superintendents, community leaders, and that's all I did was study how they make contact, the interaction, and move through their own personal crises. Now, if you understand what I'm talking about from here, then you understand what we're doing here. We're trying to begin to clear the playing field so these children, poverty, let's talk about poverty, family decline, school failure, delinquency, lack of employable skill sets. That's poverty, okay? And how do you stop it from happening over and over again? You get on the front of it. Just because a kid is born in the ghetto or negative environments does not mean they're not going to be successful. It makes that determination is how they're cared for, how their brain is developed for contact and interaction between self, other people, and environments. And that's what we're talking about today. Human system science. And I want you to understand it because when other people talk about it, they're not talking about it like I'm talking about it because I have studied behaviorism, human, animal science, cognitive science, computer science. But I'm talking about how do you look at what everyone else has dissected, which is the human spirit. Bam, I just said it, okay? And then evolved into those other sciences. From knowledge accumulated and compiled from actual interaction with human beings, and now you're applying it as though you were studying human systems when you weren't. You were studying computers, you were studying animals, you were studying anything but human beings and saying or applying that information to humans. Humans do not bark, okay? They get angry, they yell, they shout, but they can recover and they can change, they can evolve, they can create, okay? They can start all over again. They can do all these things because the brain is the adjustment. No, the brain, that's why I say sense of feel, because your sense of feel allows you to adjust to the situation. But without that sense of feel, you only have a sense of, which means you only have the environmental spirit, the environmental influx of what you've experienced. Not process, but what has driven you to where you are. Be like Mike, Don't think about it, just do what you see me do. So where's the process variable? So that sense of feel for self connects you. It connects you to the experience of the influence, and then it connects you to the experience of self and others. The processing variable. So now that forward feed is informing. That's why you study the child's brain to learn the behavior of the child, not the body. Dr. Slaton Lyme, talking to you. You talk to the brain of the body, advanced learning theory. Here I go. I say it all the time. Decode the language of the mind. That means you know the body is a program. So you have to learn how to understand when people say, in my mind, in my memory stick, I didn't say reflection, in my memory stick, because may not be processed if it's a program because it is a trained state. And so it's trained, meaning it's supposed to be predictable because you don't think you want to do something repetitiously to perfection. See? So the mind, okay, is a trained memory stick, channels of memory. Now, the difference is when you process the mind, okay, which means you understand the program that you're moving through. You understand how you're training yourself to think, for example. So you move through the experience of self to understand how it feels to train yourself to perform. And now the brain's in the lead. So now that's processed. So the program is now processed because you move through the program, and now it's processed because it's changing, it's evolving. Okay? Some people just train themselves, what I'm saying to you, and they don't evolve. That is it. They are a program because they never process the program, the training, to understand that they are humans, and human beings have to process the experience so they can evolve into higher levels of experience. Dr. Slaton Live, talking to you for real. This is the inner voice, transition to self-talk, and then brain talk. Because I'm talking about the negative environment, I'm talking about self-talk, and then I'm trying to let you know how that forward feed, brain talk, baby talk, has to be engaged, and you have to understand it's a lifelong experience. When you evolve with a child, this is brain talk, this is baby talk, and it transitions because the child learns your language, okay? Now, where's the baby talk? The baby talk's still supposed to be there because when you're in those difficult conversations, that's what you revert back to, so you never stop because that's a dialogue, that's a connection, that's a bond. So you keep talking, but we're not talking about the same language system. It's elevated in age-appropriate ways, but y'all know you're connected, and this is your special technique that allows you to have those difficult conversations and everybody's in the room saying, what the hell are they talking about? But you two know. You three know. Because baby talk is brain talk. Check it out. Dr. Slaton Live. Stay tuned.